Dust hung in the air like fine ash after a distant fire, and the sun, filtering through the narrow windows, made it visible, tangible, almost alive. The house smelled of dampness, old wood, and something else, either lime or forgotten time, frozen here like water in a well. Outside, the eucalyptus trees rustled, their shadows gliding across the walls, but inside silence reigned, thick and heavy, as if someone had deliberately pumped all sound out of the rooms. The corridors receded into darkness, turning left, right, up, down, and each turn posed a new mystery. The house wasn't built for living. It was built for escape, escape from something invisible, unnameable, yet utterly real to the one who built it. Sarah Winchester was afraid to stop. She knew if the hammers fell silent, they would come. Those her last name had killed. Those whose names she didn't know, but whose souls, it seemed, followed her. An invisible procession of the dead. The house outlived all who built it. She was the widow of one of the heirs to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company empire, a company whose rifles became a symbol of the Wild West, the Civil War, Indian massacres, and the Gold Rush. Her husband died of tuberculosis in 1981. William Wirt Winchester left her a fortune worth nearly $20 million, an amount too large to spend in a single lifetime, but the money brought her no peace. Their only daughter, Annie, had died earlier, having lived only a few weeks. Sarah was left alone, with a name, with a fortune, and with an unbearable burden of guilt she could neither name nor let go. The spiritist she consulted in Boston told her what she already knew deep down. She was haunted by the spirits of all those who had died by Winchester rifles. Thousands of souls, men, women, children, soldiers, hunters, bandits, Indians, all who had fallen with a bullet in their chest from a barrel engraved with the name Winchester. And the only way to appease them was to build a house, never stop. In 1984, Sarah Winchester bought a small ranch in San Jose, California, on the edge of orchards, where the air smelled of apples and dust. The house was modest, 8 rooms with wooden walls and a simple roof, but she had no intention of living there. She hired workers, carpenters, masons, glaziers, roofers, and gave them one command: build, every day, no days off, no holidays, no plan. She drew the drawings herself on napkins, on scraps of paper, on the walls. She wasn't an architect, didn't understand the laws of statics, didn't know how to calculate the load on beams, but she knew one thing: the house had to grow. It had to mutate, change, deceive, confuse. It had to be a labyrinth in which even the dead would get lost. The workers carried out her orders silently, with surprise, with bewilderment, but they carried them out. They added rooms to rooms, hallways to hallways, staircases to ceilings, doors to walls. They built windows facing inward, doors opening onto the void. They created staircases that abutted the ceiling. The house grew like a tumor, shapeless, chaotic, but unstoppable. Every morning brought a new order, a new blueprint, a new idea that seemed crazy but had to be executed immediately. She used the best wood: sequoia, mahogany, teak brought from India. She ordered stained glass from Europe, depicting spiders, roses, and geometric patterns that she believed warded off evil spirits. The glass was melted in Tiffany furnaces. She demanded that the house have 13 windows in every room, 13 steps on every staircase, 13 panels on every door. The number 13 became her talisman, her code, her prayer. The workers didn't ask why. They were paid. Good money, steady every week. They built, sawed, hammered nails, laid tiles. The house grew taller, wider, deeper. By 1990, it had 50 rooms. By 1900, 100. By 1910, 160. No one knew the exact number, because rooms appeared and disappeared, were rebuilt, bricked up, and opened up again. The house became an organism that breathed, grew, and mutated according to its own laws. Inside, everything was designed to confuse. The stairs rose 2 inches and then immediately descended. The door opened into the wall. The hallway suddenly narrowed to the width of a shoulder, then widened again. The window looked into another room. The fireplace was built into the corner so that the smoke flowed not up the chimney, but into the room. Some rooms were the size of a closet, others the size of a ballroom. Some had 7 doors leading in 7 different directions. Some were completely empty, unfurnished, windowless. Mirrors hung at odd angles, reflecting not the person but the space behind them. The ceilings were low and oppressive, or, conversely, soared into darkness, where neither beams nor roof were visible. The house defied logic. It was built according to the laws of fear. Sarah lived alone in this labyrinth, save for the servants, who changed every few months. The maids left, unable to bear the atmosphere. They said they heard footsteps at night, creaking floorboards, whispers in empty rooms. They saw shadows moving against the light. They found doors locked from the inside, even though no one had keys. They woke to sounds like a child's cry, but when they followed the sound, it died away. Sarah never complained. She slept in a different room every night so the spirits wouldn't know where to look for her. She wore mourning for the rest of her life, A black dress, a black veil, black gloves. She rarely left the house, receiving only a few guests. Those who saw her said she always seemed tense, like a string about to snap. Her face was pale, her eyes deep, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. She spoke to the workers through notes, rarely showing herself to them. She didn't explain her decisions, she simply ordered them to build. And the construction continued, day after day, year after year, endlessly, without a meaning that anyone but herself could understand. The house was her world, her universe, her only reality. The workers worked in 3 shifts, day, evening, and night. The sound of hammers and saws never ceased. The house sounded like a huge mechanism, like a factory, producing not goods, but space. In the basement, the boiler rooms worked, enormous cast iron furnaces devouring tons of coal. Chimneys ran throughout the house, heating the rooms, hallways, and stairways. In winter, when fog from the bay enveloped San Jose, the house smoked like a locomotive, and white steam billowed from its chimneys, mingling with the fog, so that it seemed to float in midair. It was warm and stuffy inside, smelling of wood, varnish, and coal. The workers sweated, wiped their brows, and drank water from buckets. They didn't talk to each other. The work demanded silence and concentration. Everyone knew their task. One laid bricks, another sawed boards. A third hammered nails. A fourth painted the walls. A fifth laid parquet flooring. A sixth installed stained glass windows. They were cogs in a machine that built itself. A machine that had no blueprint but a mad, inexorable engine. The will of one woman. Sarah paid them generously but demanded absolute obedience. If someone asked questions, they were fired. If someone tried to make a rational suggestion, they were fired. If someone stopped for a smoke break, they were fired. She wanted the house to grow without pause, without doubt, without logic. She believed that every pause was death, that every pause was an invitation for the spirits, that every moment of silence was their chance to enter. And so the hammers pounded, the saws screeched. Nails were driven in, planks fell upon planks. The house grew like a coral reef, layer upon layer, without a plan, without blueprints, without an architect. It was the architecture of the unconscious, the materialization of guilt, a frozen nightmare that could not be awakened. By 1905, the house was 7 stories high. After the earthquake of 1906, when the upper floors collapsed, Sarah decided not to rebuild them. She said it was a sign. The spirits were content. They didn't need height. Since then, the house has only grown outward, spreading across the ground like a giant spider. The rooms multiplied, the corridors branched, and the staircases descended into basements, where the air was cold and damp, smelling of earth and old stone. There in the dungeons were stored coal supplies, tools, and old blueprints that Sarah no longer used. Rumor has it that there were rooms she allowed no one into, rooms where she held seances, speaking with the dead. She asked for their forgiveness, trying to understand what they wanted. The workers were afraid to go down into the basements. They said it was colder than it should be, that they heard sounds that shouldn't be there, that the lights went out for no reason. The house required constant maintenance. The pipes leaked, the roof leaked, the floors creaked, the walls cracked, the windows fogged up, the doors swelled with moisture and wouldn't close. Sarah hired new workers to fix what others had just built. She demanded that every room be perfect, but as soon as it was achieved, she ordered everything rebuilt. She changed the layout of rooms, moved doors, boarded up windows, opened new ones. She was obsessed not with the result, but with the process. She didn't care what the house looked like from the outside. She cared about what was happening inside. Inside, a war was waged against an invisible enemy, and the only weapon was construction. Construction was like a ritual, like a spell, like a prayer repeated over and over again. Neighbors looked at the house with bewilderment and fear. They couldn't understand why one woman needed so many rooms. They whispered that Sarah had gone crazy, that she was possessed, that the house was cursed. Children were afraid to go near it. Local newspapers wrote about a haunted house. They wrote about a reclusive widow, about the Winchester curse. But Sarah paid no attention. She lived in her own world, where the only reality was the house, and the only meaning was its growth. She rose early, before dawn, when the fog was thickest. She walked the hallways, checking her work, leaving notes, drawing new plans. She dined alone in one of the dining rooms. There were 13 of them, and she chose a different one each time. She dined late, by candlelight, in complete silence. She slept in separate rooms, locking the doors tightly, drawing the heavy curtains to keep the moonlight out. Sleep came rarely, interrupted by the slightest rustle. She woke and listened. She listened to the house. The house breathed. She never invited guests. She didn't entertain relatives. She didn't go to church. She didn't participate in the social life of San Jose, even though she was one of the wealthiest women in the city. Her only connection to the outside world was the workers, gardeners, cooks, maids. They all knew that they couldn't talk to her about the house, couldn't ask questions, couldn't look too closely. The house was her fortress, her prison, her temple, and her tomb. She'd built it to hide from the world. But the world had long forgotten her. Only the name remained, Winchester, which sounded like a gunshot, like the echo of war, like a curse etched on the barrel of a rifle, a name she couldn't shed, like skin ingrained in her, a part of her flesh. How much did one breath cost within these walls? How much did one sleepless night cost, one prayer addressed to emptiness? Sarah didn't count. She spent money like water, without thought, without regret. She knew that money was just paper. And the house was her only protection. She believed that as long as hammers hammered, saws cut, nails were driven, she was alive. That if the work stopped, she would die. That if the house stopped growing, the spirits would find her, surround her, strangle her. And so she built, 38 years, without a break, without rest, without hope of an end. Every day was a repetition of the previous one. Every year was a repetition of the previous one. Time lost its meaning. Only work remained, only the house. Inside the house, time flowed differently. The clocks ticked. But their chimes were lost in the hallways, dissipated in the empty rooms, and muffled in the stairwells. Day turned to night, but inside it was always dim because the windows were small and curtained. The lamplight didn't reach the corners. The shadows were long, dense, almost tangible. They crawled along the walls, slid across the floor, hid behind doors. Sometimes it seemed as if they moved of their own accord, independent of the light source. The workmen didn't like to stay in the house after sunset. They left quickly without looking back and walked home through the gardens, where the air was fresh and the stars were bright. But the house remained. It didn't sleep. It breathed. It waited, waiting for something, or someone. Sarah died on September 5th, 1922, in her sleep in one of her bedrooms. She was 82 years old. She built the house for 38 years and 10 days. At the moment of her death, the hammers fell silent. The workers stopped. No one ordered them to continue. No one paid for the next week. They packed up their tools and left. The house stood still. It had 161 rooms, 47 fireplaces, 40 staircases, 2,000 doors, 10,000 windows. No one knew the exact number because some rooms were boarded up. Some doors never opened. Some staircases led nowhere. The house was complete, but it wasn't finished. It stood still, like a heart that has stopped beating. Sarah's heirs sold the house. It was bought by an investor who wanted to turn it into a museum, an attraction, a place where people could wander the labyrinth and marvel at its absurdity. He hired tour guides, installed ticket booths, printed brochures. He advertised the house as the strangest place in America, as a house built by ghosts, as a monument to madness. Tourists arrived by the hundreds, then by the thousands. They wandered through the rooms, peered into doors, and laughed at the staircases leading to the ceiling. They took photos by the windows that lined the walls. They bought souvenirs, postcards, magnets, ghost figurines. The house became a commodity. It ceased to be a refuge and became a spectacle. It ceased to be a home and became an attraction. But at night, when the tourists left, when the guides closed the doors, when the lights went out, the house returned to itself. It became what it had been: a labyrinth of fear, a space of guilt, an architecture of loneliness. The guards who were on duty at night described the sounds they heard: footsteps, creaking, whispering, crying. They said they saw shadows moving in the empty rooms, that they felt a cold that didn't come from the windows or doors, but seemed to rise from the walls themselves. They told stories of doors that opened by themselves, lamps that went out without reason, the smell of old smoke that appeared suddenly and disappeared just as suddenly. Some quit after the first night, others stayed, growing accustomed. The house was full of presence, but it was quiet, unobtrusive, almost resigned. As if the house was tired of fighting, tired of frightening, tired of being what it had been made to be. It simply was. It simply stood. It simply remembered. Over time, the house became part of American mythology. Movies were made about it, books were written, legends were created. They said that Sarah Winchester still wandered the halls, inspecting the work no one else did. They said that the spirits she tried to deceive remained in the house, lost in its labyrinth. They said the house was built on blood, that every nail was driven with prayer, that every board was soaked with tears. But no one knew the truth. The truth was simpler and more terrifying. Sarah Winchester was afraid. She was afraid of death. She was afraid of loneliness. She was afraid of guilt she couldn't atone for. And she built a house to hide from this fear. But the fear seeped inside. It filled every room, every hallway, every staircase, and became part of the house itself. The house became her fear, materialized, frozen, eternal. The house became her, and she became the house. The boundary between them disappeared somewhere around the 30th year of construction. Who witnessed the house slowly dying from the inside? No one, because the house didn't die. It simply stopped growing. It froze, like a photograph, like a moment captured in amber. Its rooms remained as they had been on Sarah's last day of work, with unfinished walls, unpainted corners, boards half-nailed. Everything was ready for the next step, but there was no next step. The workers left, leaving behind tools, plans, nails. Dust settled on everything: the tables, the floors, the windowsills. Cobwebs clung to the corners. The paint faded. The wood darkened. The house had aged, but it hadn't fallen apart. It stood strong, massive, indestructible, like a monument to something no one could fully understand. A monument to fear, a monument to guilt. The architects who studied the house couldn't find any pattern. It was chaotic, yet resilient. It obeyed no rules, yet it didn't collapse. It was built without a plan, yet every beam supported the load. Every wall stood straight. Every staircase bore the weight. It was a miracle of engineering, or proof that sometimes madness creates its own laws. Sarah didn't know physics, but she knew fear, and fear taught her to build a house that would withstand everything: earthquakes, fires, time. The house was her testament, her message, her scream into the void, echoing off the walls and returning, again and again, endlessly. A scream that never died even after her death. A scream that became the house itself. Today, the Winchester House is one of the most visited museums in California. Hundreds of thousands of people pass through its doors every year. They hear stories about Sarah, about spirits, about the Winchester curse. They laugh, marvel, take photos. They buy tickets, look at the staircases leading to the ceiling, and don't understand that what they see isn't absurdity, but despair. That every door opening into a wall is an attempt to close off the world. That every staircase leading to nowhere is an attempt to escape from oneself. That this entire house isn't architecture, but a scream frozen in wood and stone. The scream of a woman who couldn't stop because stopping meant death, who couldn't let go because letting go meant admitting guilt. But tourists don't see this. They see strangeness, curiosity, entertainment. They don't feel the cold that Sarah felt. They don't hear the whispers that she heard. They don't know what it's like to live in a house you build so you don't die, but which becomes your tomb even before you die. They walk through the rooms looking at the stained glass, the parquet floors, the fireplaces, and don't understand that all of this isn't luxury, but ritual. That every detail was chosen not for beauty, but for protection. That the house wasn't a home, but a spell to be repeated over and over again until death came and stopped it. And death came. It stopped Sarah, but it didn't stop the house. The house remained. The house survived. The San Jose archives contain old photographs of the house, black and white, blurry, stained with time. In them, the house looks even stranger than it does now. It seems larger, darker, heavier. It seems alive. The windows are like eyes. The hallways are like throats. The doors are like teeth. The house looks at the camera, and it seems to know it's being filmed and doesn't object, but it doesn't rejoice either. It simply is. It simply stands. It simply waits. Waiting for someone who will understand. There's one photograph where Sarah herself is visible. She's standing at the entrance to the house, a small black figure against the backdrop of the enormous structure. Her face is invisible, only a silhouette. She doesn't look at the camera. She's looking at the house as if checking that everything is in place. On her shoulders lies a weight that's not visible in the photograph, but can be felt. The weight of a name she didn't choose. The weight of money she didn't earn. The weight of guilt she didn't commit, but for which she took responsibility. She stands at the threshold of the house that became her life, her death, and her eternity. The house consumed her as completely as she consumed it. They merged into one. Woman and building, flesh and wood, soul and space. Sarah Winchester was one of the richest women in America, but she died alone, without family, without friends, without heirs who would remember her name. She was buried in New Haven, next to her husband and daughter, in a crypt marked Winchester. She bequeathed the house to her niece, who immediately sold it, unwilling to be associated with that cursed place. Sarah's belongings were auctioned off: furniture, paintings, stained glass, rugs, dishes. Everything was scattered among private collections, museums, and homes. All that remained of her life was the house, and the house remained standing. The house survived. The house won. It outlived her. It outlived everyone who built it. It will outlive everyone who sees it. Because houses don't die. Houses simply stand. The house stood, but the life in it had already ended, not when Sarah died. Life ended earlier, when the first hammer struck the first nail, when the first wall rose, when the first door opened into nothingness. Life ended the moment Sarah decided that the house was her salvation, because the house couldn't save her. The house could only consume her, and he consumed her. He took her time, her money, her strength, her mind, her soul. He took everything she had and transformed it into walls, floors, ceilings, stairs, doors. He transformed her into himself. And when she died, the house remained, like her body, like her voice, like her thoughts, frozen in space. Earthquakes came and went. In '99, during the famous Loma Prieta earthquake, the house suffered again. Chims collapsed, walls cracked, windows shattered. It was closed for restoration. The workers came again, not the same ones who had built the house. Under Sarah, of course, but their heirs in spirit. They repaired, strengthened, restored. They did the same things the workers had done 100 years earlier. They worked silently, focused, with the same wonder with which their predecessors had looked at Sarah's plans. The house began to ring with hammers again. The house began to breathe again, and when the restoration was complete, the house was reopened to tourists, and they came again in droves, with cameras, with questions, with a curiosity that had nothing to do with understanding. They looked, but didn't see. They listened, but didn't hear. They walked through the house, but didn't feel it. For them, the house was dead. But for the house, they were ghosts. There's a legend that 13 ghosts still live in the house, that they walk the hallways, open doors, peer into windows, that they search for a way out but can't find one because the house was built to prevent anyone from leaving, that they got lost in the labyrinth Sarah created and are doomed to wander within it forever. Tour guides tell this with a smile, as if it were a funny story, an urban legend. But sometimes, when the house is empty at night, the guards hear footsteps. Not heavy, not insistent, light, almost inaudible, like the steps of a woman in a long dress. And they know it's not the wind, not a tree, not imagination. They know it's home. Home remembers, home breathes, home lives. Sarah Winchester left no memoirs. She didn't write letters, she didn't keep diaries. After her death, thousands of drawings, notes, and sketches were found, but not a single word that explained why she built. She didn't want to explain. She wanted to build. An explanation was unnecessary. An explanation was impossible. How to explain fear? How to explain the guilt that weighs on your shoulders and won't let go? How to explain that when the whole world has forgotten you and you've forgotten the world, only home remains? Only walls, only doors that you open and close, over and over again, until you no longer understand where you are, who you are, or why you are. Home becomes the only meaning, the only purpose, the only reality. The name Winchester has become synonymous with weapons. The Winchester rifle is a legend of the Wild West, a symbol of the conquest of America, a tool of war and hunting. But for Sarah, the name was a curse. She didn't choose it. She married and received it, along with money, a mansion in New Haven, and shares in a company that manufactured death. She didn't fire these rifles. She didn't kill. But she knew that every bullet fired from a barrel engraved with the Winchester name carried a piece of her name. And she couldn't escape it. She couldn't get the money back. She couldn't change the past. She couldn't resurrect the dead. She could only build, and she built. For 38 years, without stopping, without respite. Today, Winchester rifles are displayed in museums, in private collections, at auctions. They cost thousands of dollars. Collectors are proud of them. Historians study them. Filmmakers use them in westerns. No one thinks about Sarah Winchester. When they look at these rifles, no one remembers that every weapon has not only a creator but also an heir, that every shot has not only a shooter but also those who remain behind. Sarah was one of them. She stayed. She stayed with the house she built so she wouldn't be alone. But the house didn't become company. It became a prison where she spent 38 years and then died, never freed. The house was both her curse and her salvation. Time doesn't tear down walls. It erases names. Sarah Winchester's name is forgotten by almost everyone except those who study the house's history. Tourists don't remember her. They remember the house. They remember the stairs leading to nowhere. They remember the doors opening into the walls. They remember the strangeness, the absurdity, the madness. But they don't remember the woman who built all this because she was afraid, because she believed that if she stopped, she would die, because she knew no other way to live, because life ended for her long before she died. The house still stands. It stands in San Jose, on the edge of town, surrounded by eucalyptus trees and gardens. Tourists come, look, and go. At night, the house empties. The lights go out, the doors close, and the house remains alone as it always was, as it always will be. He doesn't wait. He simply is. He simply stands. He simply remembers. He remembers the sound of hammers, the screech of saws, the voice of a woman giving orders. He remembers 38 years of construction, 38 years of fear, 38 years of loneliness. He remembers because he is this loneliness, frozen in wood, in stone and glass. A loneliness that never dies because it is not alive. It simply is. It simply stands. It simply waits. Waits for someone who will understand. And when the wind blows through the hallways, when the moon shines through the windows, when the silence becomes absolute, the house breathes, not because ghosts live in it, not because there is life in it, but because the house is the breath of Sarah Winchester, which did not stop even after her death, which continues, slow, heavy, endless, like a construction project that will never end because there is no one to stop it. The house stands, and that is its tragedy. It stands when all else is gone. It stands when the name is forgotten. It stands when the meaning is lost. It stands because it was built to stand, and it will stand until the last nail falls out, until the last board rots, until the last stone crumbles to dust. And maybe longer, maybe forever, because some houses never disappear. They simply become part of the land they stand on, part of the sky above them, part of the time that flows through them like the wind through empty corridors. The house has outlived all who built it, and it will outlive all who see it. Because a house is not a building, a house is a memory. The memory of fear, of guilt, of an attempt at salvation that turned into a curse. A memory that does not die because it is frozen in stone.